Several years ago, our local interfaith council had a bit of a kerfuffle around interfaith worship. We had had a couple of incidents during our shared worship that got people feeling a little uncomfortable. Some of you may have been there for some of them. And we decided it was time for a deeper conversation about how we wanted to worship together. The question at hand was this: how do you worship together with a group of people who have such different beliefs? We talked about how to balance sharing our faiths with one another without it feeling like proselytizing. We considered how to speak deeply about our beliefs without claiming truth or veering into realms that might offend one group or another. We wanted to be genuine and bring depth into our worship, but we also didn't want to alienate anyone. When it came down to it, there were two paths, neither of which felt quite right on their own. One was to ask folks to bring pieces of worship that are very genuine to their faith, just as they might bring to their own community, and piece them together into something. Now, the benefit here is depth and authenticity. The drawback can be that some pieces of those very genuine experiences might rub people the wrong way, or may not even make sense out of context. The pieces may also not fit well together, or feel like a cohesive whole. The other path was to create a more cohesive service that draws on those universal themes that we share, bringing in specific words or ideas from different faiths, but making sure they always make a nod to the universal, and that there is nothing that might be objectionable to anyone present. Now, the benefit to this, of course, is cohesion and unity, bringing people together on what it is that we have in common. The drawback is that it can lack depth and feel watered down. We don't get a true picture of the different faith communities when we have to make everything perfectly palatable to everyone. Now, in the end, we landed somewhere in the middle, or you might say that we didn't really make a decision at all. But the exercise of having the conversation, hearing from one another about what mattered, what did or did not work, was useful, I think. And I know that our worship has improved since those conversations. But what was most interesting for me in all of this was how familiar the conversations felt. We are, after all, doing this pluralistic worship thing every time we get together as Unitarian Universalists. It's not quite to the same extreme, but we are, as I say almost every week, a people of many diverse beliefs. And we have to make choices about how it is that we manage that. Now, here in this room and in our online gathering, I can pretty confidently say that we have represented among us almost every possible belief or lack of belief in a God or gods. I am also quite sure that there are folks in this congregation who pray every day, those who can't imagine praying, and those who might throw up a prayer for good measure in a moment of crisis. You feel seen, right? I also know that we have folks here who believe deeply in an afterlife and take great comfort in that, as well as those who are pretty sure there's some kind of reincarnation that happens after we die, those who believe we simply go back to the earth, or that your consciousness resides in everything that is. And we've got some folks who just don't think at all about what happens after death because it doesn't feel relevant. It doesn't matter to them. I know that we have people here who find wonder and awe the very most in scientific understandings of the world, in learning more and more and more about the way things work. And I know we have others who just want to dwell in the mystery, who kind of zone out when you start talking about the intricacies of the Big Bang, not because they don't believe in it, but because what matters more for them is the enormity of the universe that they feel when looking up at the stars, the humility that they find in their own smallness in the face of that wonder. We have folks who find deep meaning in sitting and meditating, going within, those who find the holy in nature, in the wonder of this world. And we have those who connect most to other humans, to the relationships that we build here and elsewhere. So many of us are a whole mix of these things. We ourselves contain multitudes. And of course, there's got to be someone here who's thinking, well, you haven't named the thing that's most important to me yet. Because the diversity of our beliefs is too plentiful to even name fully. This pluralism in our midst, this bountiful, beautiful mix of beliefs is, as Harry and Kathy sang, why we are you. It is part of what makes us choose this faith and part of what makes our faith so rich. The pluralism within Unitarian Universalism is beautiful and rich, and it can be challenging, especially when it comes to worship. After all, it means that we have to take care of all of those beliefs I just named, plus the ones I haven't even thought of yet, into account when we are planning worship. And somehow we're supposed to create an hour each week that pleases everyone. It's no easy task, I can tell you that much for sure. But it gives us what I think is a unique opportunity each week. Regularly being in worship with people who don't share all your same beliefs actually allows us to practice living in a pluralistic world. This question of how we worship together may seem like a trivial one. After all, it's only an hour each week, we can handle it. But I think it actually points to something larger. One of my favorite ways of thinking about worship comes from the root of the word liturgy, which means the work of the people. Thinking of worship as the work of the people means that we don't come here to just sit and enjoy. We come to engage, to practice, to consider and try out how it is that we want to be together in the world. So one of the things that we get to practice in Unitarian Universalist setting is how to be with others who are different than us, who connect to the earth or the mystery or the holy or God in ways that don't always line up with our own theology. And this, I hope, helps us be better at encountering difference more generally. But in order to practice well how we want to encounter pluralism out in the world, we have to engage with the pluralism in our midst, which brings us back to the question, or perhaps the conundrum, of Unitarian Universalist worship. And that question looks very much like the one that our looks very much like the one that our Interfaith Council came to. Do we create worship with depth and specificity, even if it might not appeal to everyone? Or do we water things down enough that there is nothing at all that might not be objectionable? I've seen it taken to both extremes in Unitarian Universalism. There are some UU congregations that have decided very clearly that they do one type of worship. And so there is basically one brand of UU that will feel comfortable there. Just humanists, or just theists, or just those who connect to Christianity. Another way of doing this is to have more than one worship service, with a different style or theology evident at each one. For example, you'll often see UU congregations with an earth-centered spirituality group that does worship at times other than Sunday morning. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of this. It works, especially for really big congregations. But I do always wonder if there is something lost in that clarity of who each type of service is for, in the segmenting off of particular theologies from our larger whole. Now, the other extreme, of course, is to try to please everyone in every moment, to only say or do things that will be sure to appeal to the entire group. This, I don't think, ever goes well, because, big surprise, you cannot please everyone. And in the attempt, there is often a theological depth that is lost. There's a reluctance to declare that anything is true, or to invoke anything spiritual or religious at all. We end up skimming the surface of topics with broad phrases and shallow ideas. In our effort to feed everyone something they like, everyone leaves a little hungry still. As is so often the case with extremes, there are drawbacks to both. I believe it is in the middle ground between these two that we find the sweet spot of Unitarian Universalist worship. One of my colleagues describes it like this: "You sing my hymn, I sing yours." That phrase can be taken quite literally. Sometimes I'll sing a hymn I don't really like or that doesn't speak to me because I know that it's meaningful for you, and sometimes you will do the same for me. It can also mean that I engage in a ritual even though it might not be my cup of tea, or you sit quietly through the sermon even though you'd rather be standing up singing. It means that you put in the effort to find meaning in the Wonderbox moment even if it's not your favorite. And I do my very best to hear something that speaks to me in the poetry, even though I never really resonate with poems. It means that all of us do some translating. Maybe when I say love, you translate it to God or compassion. Or when I say God, you translate it to great mystery or earth or love. It means if I invite us to pray or take a moment of quiet or center ourselves, you figure out best what that means to you, how you connect in that moment with your deepest self or with that that is greater than all of us. Basically, you sing my hymn, I sing yours, is a practice in the give and take of pluralism, and not just a reluctant, I'll put up with it kind of give and take, but an actual attempt to get something out of those moments of challenge, to truly engage with them. This is not always easy, of course. As psychologist Mick Cooper says, pluralism isn't easy. It is a constant willingness to self-challenge and to look at where we might be wrong or limited, even with regard to pluralism itself. It requires a capacity to detach ourselves from our agendas, our beliefs, our commitments, and to recognize that there may be other ways. And it also requires us to recognize that we cannot wholly achieve that. Now, all of this takes a certain amount of spiritual maturity that I'm not always sure that we do a good job of teaching in our congregations. It requires us to be clear enough in our own beliefs to put them into relationship with the beliefs of others without feeling challenged or defensive. This takes time to learn, and we don't always succeed. But when we do, I think that we're able to find deeper meaning in our own beliefs, even as we make space for other beliefs to coexist alongside our own. So as we come together for worship each week, I hope each of you will come in the spirit of you sing my hymn, I'll sing yours. I hope we know that the diversity of beliefs here, when engaged well, can offer richness and depth. And I hope that we can practice together here. We can make our mistakes and try again. We can see how it might work, all so that we might better engage with the pluralism out in our world. May it be so.